All right, we're on part two of attachment and parenting. We're talking a lot about this word attachment here and how babies develop more socially. The first vocabulary term that we need to talk about is stranger anxiety. This normally occurs around 8 months, and it happens when the baby is afraid or shows distress when a stranger comes around. This usually occurs because the baby has formed an attachment with the mother or primary caregiver. This attachment is just a preference for that person. Oftentimes it's the mother because the mother is the one that's providing the primary care for the child, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the mother. And so um, attachment is very emotional, so it's an emotional tie. All right, and so when these child have this stranger anxiety, they're showing this attachment to their caregiver. It's normal if they're freaking out. um, it's not really that they're angry or that they're distraught, or not distraught but sad. It's kind of a different emotion that they have in there. And if they have what's called a secure attachment. Actually, there's two types. Mary Ainsworth, you'll see how to spell her name a later slide. But Mary Ainsworth had two attachment styles, which he did her research. Mary Ainsworth's the name you need to know: secure and insecure. So she said, based on your parenting, if you provide and respond to the child when it needs help, when it cries, when it's hungry, you're gonna form a secure attachment, and the baby's going to grow up to be happy and healthy. If you don't respond to those needs when it's very young, you're going to have an insecure attachment, and the baby's going to not grow up as well as it could. So these two different attachment styles, that emotional bond between the baby and the mother or father or any other primary caregiver. Um, Stranger anxiety usually passes and it'll go away, and especially it's some research shows that the stronger your attachment, the more easily the stranger anxiety goes away as they age. Um, Critical period and imprinting are kind of along the same lines. Critical period is a time usually right after birth, or immediately following birth, where you got a short period of time in order to develop. Most fully, you have to be exposed to certain things. Um, this could be physically, emotionally, socially, but there's these critical periods. One of these critical periods that happens in animals, it doesn't happen in humans, but other animals, is this thing called imprinting. It actually usually happens within the first couple hours after um, they are born. And for instance, birds and Lawrence, I think he was Swiss. I might be way off on that, but he did some research with ducks and geese rather, and printed. He was the first thing that they saw, and they followed him around like he was their mother or father or whatever. And because during that critical period for that animal, the very first they decided who was going to be their primary caretaker, and he was around them during this time, and so he became their primary caretaker. So that was an example of imprinting. It imprints that they see imprints on their brains to follow that person or usually that animal. And then when does that imprinting occur? During a critical period, so during a special period of time. This is a picture of Harry Harlow's monkeys, as they're referred to in the biz. Harlow's monkeys, he did a lot of research actually with his wife as well. They had these two, they did a lot of research, a lot of different types of research, but here you see a fake monkey right here, and there's another one over here. And there's one right here. This one, as you kind of see in the background, doesn't have any warmth to it. It's just net or just wires. And what he's most famous for is this one would have a bottle in it, right? And so the monkey would, and this one didn't have anything. And previously what was thought, what Freud actually proposed was this thing called the cupboard theory. Cupboard theory. And what Freud said was that babies don't form these emotional attachments. They're going to go to whoever gives them the food. Whoever has the milk, whoever has the food in the cupboard, that's where the babies are. That's why they're attached to their mothers, because they provide the food. Well, Harlow showed that this wasn't true. Um, this, and it had this face on it over here, so it didn't look such like a crocodile. But the monkey that, or the fake monkey that didn't have, it was just wire, they would spend very, very little time over there with that one. They would basically spend all their time hanging on and holding on to this warm monkey that felt more like a real mom. And then they'd jump over to the other one, drink until they were full, and they'd jump back over here. And what it showed is that these monkeys wanted to have this attachment, right? They wanted to form this attachment. All babies need this attachment, and that the food wasn't the primary reason for that attachment. It was they wanted to feel this warmth and this sense of closeness, this emotional tie. And you don't get an emotional tie with wire and metal. And so that kind of disproved this cupboard theory in Freud. And Harley did a lot of other research actually showing how like even abusing the monkeys would hurt them, or separating them and seeing how they responded to that, right? We get into some ethical stuff today with some of that stuff, but it showed a lot about attachments and whatnot in developing animals, and which we were able to use to extrapolate into human development. Um, Moving from that, as the baby is developing or the child is developing, they develop what's called a self-concept. A self-concept is just who I am, right? It's just who I am. It's not how I feel about myself. How I feel about myself is your not self-confidence, your self-esteem. Your self-esteem. That's how you feel about yourself. Who you think you are. Who are you actually? That's your self-concept. And that self-concept, develops based on parenting, based on the person's temperament, and maybe sometimes a combination of the two, or maybe one or the other. We're not 100% positive of which goes which way. But a temperament is kind of what you're inherently born with. It's your tendency to how you're going to react to things emotionally, socially. How do you just generally react to things? It's kind of like your baseline. I like to think of it as like a baseline. I'm going to always start from this baseline when I react. Now, you may not always react shy, but if your baseline is way down here in the shy area, you're going to react shy more often than if your baseline is up here, where in the more social area, right? This person down here can still do something way up here, right? They can act not shy if this is like a shy continuum, right? Shy's on shyness. Actually, shyness be going down here. And they can still act up here, but their baseline has to go travel farther. It's going to be more of a stretch for them, whereas this person is just a little bit of a ways for them to get up there. And so this temperament is kind of, I like to think of it as like a baseline. It's kind of inherently what you're born with. So does your temperament, questions are asked, research is done. Does your temperament define what your self-concept is? Or is it your parenting, the parenting from the mother? Or does the parenting is affected by the temperament? Or is the temperament affected by the parenting? We've got different ideas about that. And then during development to the child, they develop this basic trust with the caregiver based on the attachment that they've had, the self-concept, etc. So basic trust is just something that another researcher, Erickson, is responsible for, and he says if all the things are going well and the child is developing emotionally with the caregivers, then they're going to develop this basic trust for them, and they're going to be just fine. So basic trust is an idea from Erickson. Last kind of thing we need to talk about is parenting styles. There's 3 parenting styles you need to know. Authoritarian. Authoritarian is military, right? This is military style. My way or the highway. Think of authoritarian. I don't know. I like history, so authoritarian. I think of things called Hitler's Germany was called an authoritarian state, right? Authoritarian state was there's one guy or one group in charge. That group makes the rules. They decide how those rules are going to be handled, and they don't ask questions. They don't ask for advice. It's just their way or the highway, right? You get thrown in jail or killed if you don't follow that. Now, parenting is not quite as brutal, but authoritarian parent doesn't uh, negotiate. It doesn't take into account much. It's just their way or the highway. Um, so this is generally seen as a not as effective way to parent, but we need to understand what it is. So authoritarian, my way or the highway. There's another type, permissive. Permissive is the opposite of military parent, right? Permissive is exactly like it sounds. The child gets to do whatever they want, or almost whatever they want, and not a whole lot of rules or boundaries. And again, this is another thing that's not that great, right? The child's not the best way to do it from research standpoint, right? Authoritarian, not the best. Too many rules, not enough. Permissive, no rules, not good. Authoritative, which kind of sounds like authoritarian, but authoritative. This is the best. This is the one you want. This is the one that sets rules, sets boundaries, but also takes into account the individual child and their needs and their wants, and goes more of a middle road with it. And this is the one you want to do. So authoritative. If you remember authoritarian, like an authoritarian state, um, then you know that the other one is the good one, right? So remember what authoritarian, like an authoritarian state in history, authoritarian state would be Nazi Germany, fascist Italy with Mussolini, um, China under Mao Zedong. You know, authoritarian. What's going on in there? Permissive would be free reign, everything goes, kind of like almost like anarchy. And then authoritative is the one you want. There's a lot of famous names in developmental psychology that you should be familiar with. We've talked about most of these. Lev Vygotsky, he came up with this thing called the zone of proximal development. And that's what this is a picture of. He says children develop, and here's where they currently are. Now they can develop a little bit by that, kind of with scaffolding is a fancy word to say that. You take what they know and you add a little bit and a little bit more, and they're going to learn. They're going to continue to grow. They're going to continue to progress. If you try to teach them too much, you're out here in this beyond reach of present. They're not going to learn anything. So, for instance, if you are trying to teach a kid to play baseball, and they're just learning how to throw the ball, if you're trying to teach them how to throw a curveball or a slider, or trying to teach them the finer points of baseball, you know, the real strategy that the professionals use when they're 8 years old and they barely learning how to throw the ball, that's beyond their reach, right? They're not going to learn anything. Everything's going to go over their head, and they're not going to learn anything. However, if you step by step and you teach them a little bit, you teach them how to hold the ball, you teach them the arm angle to throw it, and you go little by little and then add and add and add. That's what's called the zone of proximal development. It's this area where it's just a little bit past what they know how to do. And if you continue just going a little bit past what you know how to do, then they're going to be all right. And this is generally what teachers try to do in school. We generally try to take what you know, add a little bit more to it, and push you a little bit farther to give you a little bit more knowledge. If we try to teach a fourth grader AP psychology, they're not going to get anything, right? That's beyond their reach. But we can teach them maybe some things about psychology here. Vygotsky said that a lot of this zone of proximal development comes by interacting with other children. So when children just interact with each other, they're learning from each other, and they're learning is this. My son right now, right? He plays soccer like every day at recess, and I've seen him play. Sometimes plays with older kids who are a little bit better than him, and he's learning. He comes back and he knows how to do a different. How to kick the ball a little bit differently, how to pass it differently, how to stop it differently, because he's just going a little bit farther watching with these older kids, and it's helping him develop. Harry Harlow, we talked about, he's with the monkeys, right? He's the monkey man, and he was all about attachment, showed about attachment styles, which is also what Mary Ainsworth did. Mary Ainsworth, remember, she had the secure and the insecure attachment styles. That's what she's known for. Piaget, we talked about last time. He had his stages of cognitive development. And then Erik Erikson, who I just mentioned in the last slide. Erik Erikson, we'll see his stages actually in a later screencast. But Erik Erikson was also a developmental psychologist. He came up with that, what we just saw, what was it? Basic trust. There we go. With basic trust. And he was actually a follower or a little bit of a disciple of Freud, and so you'll see when we see his stages that they kind of match up with Freud's stages. But that's about it. So these are some of the important people you should know from developmental that we've kind of talked about thus far, and we'll see you next time.